Hey, well, great. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, everybody figuring out the logistics. Welcome. What a year, right? In the past 13 months, actually, what we've all experienced. And um, even without asking, and I know a lot of you and many of you we've talked to, everybody has been stretched thin this past year. So we've gone from like scrambling to do school remotely, to spring plans, fall plans, changing in plans, uh, the winter break, et cetera, right? Everything's just been responding to the here and the now and the urgent and the crisis. And all of it's been unknown and constantly changing. So you've been challenged professionally, and then we all have personal lives and families and situations. We've been working on that. So thank you. Thank you all for what you've been doing. We do have an understanding that, but part of what we're doing today is helping us all pivot from responding to those immediate things to looking ahead, getting back to our plans, aligning to our strategic thinking that we've had prior to all this. And today's conversation is really focused on federal funding and the ESSER money that's coming. Multiple distributions, right? There's three different distributions of it, and lots of questions about not only the amounts, but what it can be used for, et cetera. So today's effort is just a kickoff. There's a lot of things we don't yet know, but we're going to explain what we do know. MAPSA and the Michigan Council of Charter School Authorizers is collaborating again to bring you really good information about what's happening. And again, some of that is we don't know, no one knows yet. But it's certainly important for all of us to start to go back and say, okay, where was my strategic plan? What do I need to do in that plan? How do I take what I've learned from this past year and apply it to that plan? How can I use these federal resources to actually move us forward as a school? So it's a beginning to do that, and we're excited about it and appreciate the folks that are joining us today. I'm going to mention them, and then I'm going to kick it over to Alicia for a quick minute. But today we're going to have Melissa May with Krosky Lanny PC. We're going to talk about auditing. It's going to be important and exciting. Melissa's going to do a great job. And then we have Michael Robel from the Center for Charter Schools at Central Michigan University, who's been plugging into all this information to tell us what we do know about all this ESSER funding. Corey Northrup, who's the chair of the Michigan Council of Charter School Authorizers and the director at the Center for Charter Schools at Central Michigan University are all going to be our experts today, our resources today. So we appreciate all of you. But before we get started, I'm going to turn over to Alicia Urbane. I think you all know Alicia. She's done a remarkable job this year. Just like all the rest of you, we've kind of struggled through this, but Alicia, we don't know what we would have done without your being plugged into the current information. So give us any updates that we need to know today. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I will start with a brief school aid update. So there's a couple things to note. Currently, we have both the supplemental, which is additional funding for the current year budget going through, and we have the regular normal FY22 budget. And they're moving simultaneously right now. So that's causing some confusion for people, including myself, because I seem to talk about them interchangeably. So if you catch me doing that, feel free to ask which budget I am talking about. But first, the supplemental, that will have funding the remaining ESSERS 2 funding that got vetoed previously and the ESSERS 3 funding. And it will have an equity payment for schools if ESSERS 1, or I'm sorry, if your ESSERS 3 payment does not equal at least $1,093 a student, there will be an equity payment to make up that. So everybody should get at least $1,093 a student. Included, the supplemental was amended yesterday to change the, you had to have had 20 hours by a date in March, to change that to 20 hours by May 10th. So they have changed that. If you weren't in person before, but you are now, you could still be eligible for that equity. And that only applies to that equity payment. If you are getting more than $1,093 per student on ESSERS 3, then it does not apply. Highlights of the FY22 budget include, anywhere from 50 to 100, 50 on the low end, $100 on the high end per pupil. That is the House proposed version. The Senate proposed version is 125 on the low end, 250 on the high end. As you all know, it's a negotiation process. Timing, I think we're going to see the supplemental move next week. Probably see some movement on the FY22 budget, but most of the work in the FY22 budget won't happen until after the consensus revenue estimating conference toward the end of May. So not expecting anything soon on the FY22 budget, potentially even through the summer with negotiations. But the supplemental budget will probably move relatively quickly over the next few weeks. Couple other things. I know a few of you have reached out to me about summer school issues and the geographic boundaries. The Senate removed that. The House still keeps it in. So that's continuing to be negotiating. I know it's not a lot of you, but know that I'm working on it. And the summer school in the Senate also changed. Instead of 8 weeks, it's 30 hours. But again, that's the Senate, not the House. Quick couple things. If you guys didn't hear that, the governor had a press conference this morning on putting some metrics in place of when we can start to get back to normal. It all is relative to vaccine rates. We're currently at about 4 million first dose vaccines in Michigan. We have to get to about 4.5 million for the first tier to be reached, where they start to relax things. One of the things the governor's office asked is if there are schools that are interested in hosting pop-up vaccine clinics, to first, if you have a relationship with your local health department, talk to them and work it out with them. If you're not hearing back from them or you don't have the relationship, let me know and we'll work it out with DHHS. They are looking for partners to host pop-up vaccine clinics in their area. With that, I will turn it back over because I know that we have a lot of mostly important material on ESSERs that I don't want to take up too much time.
There are a few questions, Alicia. I don't know if you want to check your chat. You have a question about summer school funding for cybers?
You know what, Stephanie, I have not paid attention, but I suspect that that's probably the case. And also, Frank, yes, the Senate version, instead of 8 weeks, it's 30 hours. So a lot of summer school programs said they only go 6 weeks. So they just changed it to 30 hours instead of weeks. But again, that's a Senate version. That is not a done deal.
Okay, am I up?
Great. Yeah, Michael, go ahead. Thank you so much.
No doubt. Thank you, Alicia, too. I think I'll probably touch, I'm gonna try and share my screen with you guys. And then I will probably touch a little bit on some of the things you mentioned. Okay, am I good? Everybody see my screen? Okay, thanks guys. So I'm trying to cover some, amounts of the ESSER buckets, timelines of what you guys can expect going forward from right now. And then hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions. Again, I think like Alicia mentioned, there are certainly still things that we don't know and that we will find out. I know Dan mentioned that as well. But I think I'd like to start right at the beginning. Why is this so confusing? We're all reasonably intelligent people here. We're trying to understand this. How come we have to have webinars on this? How come everybody doesn't just get it right away? I think there's a lot of reasons. Not the least of which is now there's 10 new acronyms to juggle around in your head. And obviously that's something that we could all use more of, right? Just 10 more acronyms. But really there's a lot of major reasons. I think the first thing is that it comes in multiple pieces, right? So the first time that we were really exposed to getting COVID funds was last July and August. You'll remember we had the CRF funds and those flowed through state aid. And so I think in terms of how we're experiencing the ESSER funds and applying for the discretionary pieces, which again, I'll cover in more detail, those CRF funds, they seemed a little more automatic, so to speak. And so now that things are different and there's more and more buckets, it can be a little overwhelming. There are also, even within those pieces, each piece has multiple parts. And so the larger chunks now are the ESSER 1, the ESSER 2, the ESSER 3. The largest chunk of that is a formula grant based on your Title I numbers, Title 1A. But then there's also a competitive piece, a discretionary side, where MDE is statutorily allowed to reserve 10% of each of those larger buckets and outline a lot of different federal grants. So, one of the main things that you guys will remember is, most recently we had the 23B, and that was the summer school, the before and after school innovative programs. You had to hop in, engage in I believe it's GEMMARS, and try and apply for those competitive pieces. Well, that's separate from the ESSER, but it's all baked in, and I think it just provides another way for districts and all of our partners and stakeholders to, it's just another hoop and another hurdle, and it makes it difficult to understand. A little more to Alicia's point in how we actually see these funds now. These are federal monies. So I know that, if you're plugged into the news, if you're watching what they're passing, it seems like, well, haven't they already passed all these things months ago? Well, yes, at the federal level they have. But what we need, that doesn't go directly to individual districts in Michigan. We need what's called a legislative solution to these federal monies that are floating out there right now. And so much like Alicia mentioned, the supplemental, so all of you guys are going to pass a budget, and then throughout the year you amend your budget. The state works the same way. The state passes a supplemental to their current budget, and once they have an avenue or a vehicle to get those funds out to districts, then it goes to MDE to design processes and procedures. And those are, the systems that they run to get you guys, engaged in applying, and then ultimately getting those funds to you and your districts and your students and classrooms. Alicia mentioned that, ESSER 2, when you guys submitted your recent spending plans, you had a piece for the ESSER 2, but now you're going to get another piece. And originally that was because a sizable chunk, I think a little over 50% of the formula piece was vetoed. And so now we're in a process here where there's going to be another, supplemental, and then that money then will come in through there, and it will go through MDE, and then eventually we'll get to you. It's all brand new. So guidance is being developed in tandem. I think even, the MDE folks will tell you when you're in meetings with them or other stakeholders that you may, be conversing with, a lot of people are quick to say, we don't know right now. We're waiting for guidance in order to be able to figure out how the process will work for you guys. I think we can take what we do know to figure out what we will see. And that is that we can rely on a GEMS-MARS sort of solution for us. I think that original spending plan for half of ESSER 2 will help to, really show us the path for the remaining ESSER 2s, and then ESSER 3 and possibly other funding sources that come on. But I've used a lot of acronyms, and so now I want to give us a sense of how we can get organized in this. And so, like I said, there's just multiple acronyms. So you'll hear, and I don't know if you guys can see my mouse up here, but if I'm on the legislation category, we hear about the CARES Act. No one really says CRESA. I think it's just CRRSA. And then I think some of us who, again, if you're following the news and watching what the feds are doing, the most recent one is ARP. Well, all of those green light some funds to go into the ESSER funds, right? The emergency, don't let me get that wrong. I'm not even going to guess because I don't like to get these things wrong. But each of those acts correspond to one of the ESSER buckets, right? So CARES is ESSER 1, CRRSA, ESSER 2, and then the ARP is ESSER 3. You see then in the when were they signed? And even the most recent one, ESSER 3 or ARP, was signed in January. But again, we need to wait for the state to get through their supplemental process in order to get those funds to you. Notes I have is that, again, when you got your CRF monies last year, that was a separate from the ESSER 1. And that, I think, again, adds to the confusion of, well, we got those through state aid, and now we're working through different systems for different amounts of money. And again, it's just another avenue, another opportunity to introduce confusion to this process. I enter the how much, and we'll get into more Michigan's piece of this, but I enter the how much so that we can get a conception of exactly how large these buckets are. So you'll see that they really increase as the process has moved along, and those pieces are, I mean, tremendous. I don't think, if you've been in this game in Michigan school finance for 20, 30, 40 plus years, I don't think we've ever seen money like this. And so I think it's safe to say that we may not again. But again, it's just important to kind of get the scale of that and to see. And so again, if we jump into Michigan share, and I put the CRF separately because we kind of saw that through state aid last year. But then if you go down here, you see Michigan's piece of the, when I say formula in the amounts category, all of those are that's the large 90% chunk, the Title 1A that you guys are seeing. And then for some of you districts who are under 450 per kid for ESSER 2, or I believe it's 1,093 for ESSER 3, then you can, engage in the equalization through SAF. But again, there's a lot in there that has to go through the supplemental process in order to ultimately get to you. And if you remember from my last slide, all I can really tell you right now is it's coming soon. That's not something that I don't think anybody in the world can guarantee when we're going to see those things. And so, unfortunately, I'm sure there's going to be questions around that. Well, what about me and when about our district? And those questions just simply do not have answers right now. As we move forward, once you do get the money, though, there are a lot of allowable use categories that have actually, fortunately, remained consistent. And those are the 12 are right here. Obviously, you guys can see this this infographic. I have a link for this in a following slide. But then, I think many of us have seen this in multiple areas right now. One thing I did want to add. So we continually wait for guidance both from our department, MDE, but then also the U.S. Department of Ed. What they have sent out though is a really useful quote in one of their FAQs. They said a broad and permissive list, and I do think if you read these 12 allowable use categories, which are in place for ESSER, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, I think you'll note that they truly are broad, and in fact. The first 11 are broad, and the 12th kind of says other activities that are necessary. Further, MDE or the USDE, everything they put out obviously goes through their own rigorous editing process. If they're going to call this broad and permissive, it means they want you to have this money. They want you to spend this money. And so, if I can leave you with anything, it's to say, get aggressive, make sure we're talking to our MDE partners to make sure that we get every possible dollar that you guys qualify for and can get into your districts. Make sure that you're doing that, because really the best guidance we have right now is that we want you guys to have every penny that you're entitled to, and we want you to use it to address the needs of your students coming out of this horrible pandemic. There are a few changes to ESSER 3. 20% must go towards addressing what they call, quote, learning loss. That'll be further defined again in the allowable use guidance, and I wish I had more information there, but we just continue to need to wait for that. And then I believe that it was mentioned by Alicia previously, developing and making public a plan for your return to in-person instruction. Those things, again, I believe if we can use any past precedent as example, they will all be baked in and built into the systems that MDE uses to ultimately get you guys these funds. I'll close with a few useful links. I stayed out of some of the really nitty-gritty details. I know we have a pretty broad base of stakeholders in this meeting, and sometimes you get into the actual, we'll use this grant code for this and this grant code for that. We start talking in Greek to some people, and I wanted to make sure that we stay together to the maximum extent possible. Certainly the COVID memos, if you want to read those, they're posted, and the detail to all of the stuff that I've talked about today is housed in those memos. And fortunately for those of our stakeholders on the call that aren't specific to the finance realm, those cover the waivers that you guys, the assessment waivers that you guys went through in the preceding weeks, and just any number of topics, right? There's also a simplified infographic on funding sources, which again I think is highly useful, because it just remains confusing. This stuff remains confusing, and it's sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Also, again, I know many of our stakeholders on the call are continue to be like, well, what about me? What is my number, and when do I get it? MDE has published program allocations for a lot of these buckets. I think they tell you that they're estimates, but I also think that they tell you they're probably pretty close estimates. And so that link there will kind of give you a better sense of what you can expect, because I know we're all going through, you know, the budget process right now, and budgets are going to look very different this year because they're going to have a lot of federal dollars that we're just simply not used to seeing. And so having a sense of what you're going to get can give you a better sense of your plan and how you're going to spend it. I will close there and I will stop sharing my screen. I see 5 chats. Find out if our SAF funding application is approved. Honestly, I apologize. I could not speak to that. That's an MDE process. When will funds for ESSER 2 be available to draw down? So again, half of that you just completed your spending plan, and then the other half of ESSER 2 is still in that supplemental process. The sausage needs to be made at the legislative level. So, you know, all I could tell you is soonish, which I know is unfortunate. I wish I had more for you, but it's a process that we have no control over. I think, yeah, that's perfect. You're not really going to speak to that one. It's kind of specific to an individual school. Yes, so that link was in there. I would go to those program allocations. The tidings amendment extend the grant periods. Yes, so the links that if you want to use my slide, the September 30th dates of, you know, 01 for ESSER 2, 02 for ESSER, or 01 for ESSER 1, 22 for ESSER 2, and 23 for ESSER 3. I apologize, that's a mouthful. Are including the tidings amendment. I think I will end there. Happy to answer additional questions. I apologize, that's a lot of info.
No, Michael, we knew that going in. So Becky, we're again, this is all encompassed in, this is the beginning, right? Beginning of information. So utilizing the mastermind network, we're gonna resource, store all this information. Becky, where can people find those links? And Michael, I'm assuming you're gonna share that presentation with us and it'll be on the mastermind network.
Yep, I'll make sure that Michael's PowerPoint will also be, in addition to the video recording, accessible later today here in the Mastermind Network, and we'll send out a notification to everyone so that you guys can have access to all of those links and materials too.
An underlying theme, which can be frustrating, but we knew this going in. A lot of the answers to your questions are going to be, we don't know, no one knows yet, but this is a beginning. And if there's anything in knowing that, okay, there's not an answer to that question yet, you at least know that you know. I know that's kind of frustrating, but thank you, Michael, for that. The next thing we knew is almost the other end of that spectrum, right? The size of these dollars that most of your schools are going to be receiving. In some cases, it may not be true, but you combine existing title money that you receive with these 3 distributions that Michael just described, it's going to trigger some different kinds of auditing. So that's why I wanted to have Melissa here today to explain what that process might look like. Don't wait for the end, right? Know on the front end how you're going to be evaluated. So Melissa, thank you for being here today to talk about some of that, what schools can do as they're planning to use these dollars and preparing to make sure they pass audits.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the time this morning. I will be relatively brief and high level, so I'm happy to answer any questions, and I am available. My name is Melissa May, and I'm a partner at Cross Helani, and we actually are the largest charter school auditor in the state. We audit over 65 charter schools, and we only work with charters. And to give some perspective, which I assume a lot of you are on this call to understand this, last year in our 60 audits that we did, we had 18 of them that went through single audit. This year, with the schools that I've heard from so far, they are up to over 35. And I still have a couple schools that are waiting on. So because of all of this funding, we are triggering a lot of single audits, and that's causing a lot of what do I do? So your single audits are going to be triggered once you expend $750,000 of federal money. So with these allocations, you're getting all of this money, but until you actually expend those dollars, that is the trigger of when we're going to bring in a single audit. So again, you're looking at all of your title grants, all of your rural ed, or anything you get directly from the feds that don't come through state aid or through the state system, all of these ESSER funds, Food service, that's one that usually gets overlooked because it's kept in a different fund, but all of your food service dollars. And then again, as Michael mentioned, those dollars that came through on state aid, a little bit different than how we've seen federal money come through from last year, those district COVID costs that came in July, and those coronavirus relief funds that came in August. So those are part of your federal funding. And again, when you spend those monies is when we're going to trigger that single audit threshold. So if you guys are on the fence about anything, please reach out to your auditors now, talk to them. If you're not sure if you have a single audit, ask. We are always available. We are happy to answer questions in advance, because when we are in September and we're going through and doing all of the audit work, and then we go, oh, wait, you have a single audit, that gets a little bit stressful for everybody on both sides of the table. And please know, I just want to give everybody a reminder, just so it's not a surprise, this is a separate audit. It does come with a separate engagement letter, and it will be separate fees for this. So just so there's no surprise, just remember that your audit fees for the year could go up this year because of the single audit. Again, if you're not sure, please reach out to your auditor. Start talking to them now, because again, it goes on your expenditures, not necessarily when you're awarded those dollars. And some of those funds you get in advance, like the CRF funds, and they're just kind of sitting there in that unearned revenue line item. So until you bring that down onto the income statement, that's when we talk about it. Some items to have ready for your auditors, regardless of what program we're going to audit, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We do need some information on all of your federal programs, just so that when we report on your schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which is basically the single audit report that we get, we have to have all of that information, because it does get, again, reported back up to the federal government, and so they can track the funds. So make sure that you have all of your grant awards and the letters. Usually can find those in the state system. And we just need copies of those, because a lot of those will have dates allowable of when you can expend those funds. The one that we used to see a lot would be Title I, and as long as you got your application in before the beginning of the year, your allocation date was July 1st. But if you got it in late and you weren't able to start expending those dollars by a certain date, then we have to know what that is, so that we make sure that you're in compliance with that. Also, CFDA numbers, those are the tracking numbers that the federal government gave you for all of these grants. We just have to make sure that they're reporting properly. So if you can get those ahead of time, that's fantastic, and that would be great for something for us to have. One of the requirements too for all of these restricted funds is to make sure that you are recording them in their own accounts, and that they can be easily extracted from your financial records. So the state chart of accounts makes it extremely easy to break these out, revenues and expenditures, so that those can easily be pulled out. Most of the time we're looking for matching to make sure that your revenues are matching your expenditures. But as long as we can pull that out easily, then you should be good, and we shouldn't have any issues. Updated internal control guidance on how you spend your federal monies for cash receipts, cash disbursements, federal procurement, all of that. There's lists out there that the state of Michigan has, and I can absolutely provide that as well. And like I said, just make sure everything is separately stated. So as far as which programs that we're going to be testing, that's going to be kind of the question of the day. Normally, under non-COVID times, the biggest programs that usually got tested were Title I and lunch, just because of their size and what they're used for. They're relatively easy to audit, a couple times depending on which thresholds we have to get to, because we go through and identify the programs that we're going to look at in order to figure out what we're going to audit. It would depend on how many programs we're going to audit. This year, again, it's all going to be on your expenditures and when you expend those monies, and based on how that's going to be. So this single audit process for schools that are smaller, that haven't been exposed to this, could potentially have single audits for a couple of years going out. So just be aware of that. Most likely, we're going to be testing these new funds, the ESSER funds, the coronavirus relief funds, just because they're new. They're very large and they are considered to be risky by the federal government. However, because we have certain thresholds that we have to get to and different types of programs that we have to have in order to get to our thresholds for audit, we have to make sure that we're testing enough. So instead of testing just Title I or just ESSER, we might have to test IDEA, we might have to test Title I, we might have to test Title II. It depends. So it's going to be probably a lengthier process for those of you who have been through single audits before. There probably will be additional programs that we're going to have to look at. And again, it's all going to be dependent upon the timing of those expenditures. So I don't know that I can give you a for sure on what we're going to test, but again, talk to your auditors. Let's talk now so we can start determining some of this information. Again, the guidance on the allowable expenditures, as Michael stated, it's very broad, which is good for schools. And again, the intention of this money was to make sure that schools had this money and that they could spend it. But again, with all federal money, obviously we have to have the tracking related to it to make sure that it is being spent appropriately. So unfortunately for auditors, this makes it a little bit gray for what we're testing because we are testing at the federal level. So just make sure that you can keep track of as much information as you possibly can. Narratives work great. Please explain your plans, detail out as much information as you can. Any way that you can relate it back to this COVID-19 pandemic. If it's in the narrative, we'll be able to at least have a starting point on how we test, and then we can go from there on what additional information that we need. But as much documentation as you can get on all of your expenditures using these funds would be great. And if you can start accumulating that now, I know with our schools, we try to ask them during the year to keep an audit file, and just every time they have something that they think is audit related, just put it in there so that at the end of the year, when we come knocking and ask questions, you can go to that file. And again, it's an easy place to just kind of go to. So when you're using it for payroll, again, PARs and certs are no longer required, but please make sure that there's some kind of tracking on your payroll costs so that we can tie those back and make sure that everything's being spent. The CRF funds had a little caveat in there that if you received less than $500 per pupil, then the documentation could be a little bit less intense. So make sure you're taking those CRF funds and adding any local, ISD, county CRF funds that you received to see if you got over or under that $500 threshold. And again, just making sure that you're talking to your auditors ahead of time. We like it. We love hearing from you, and we'll get through this year regardless of how everything goes. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Melissa. I love your optimism because that's always nice to hear from your auditor. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Corey. So Corey, thank you. Again, key component, not only what the federal government has been saying, but what the state is going to tell us in guidance, but obviously your authorizer and how they're working. So Corey's leadership and the rest of the council has put some resources together so we can start to inform you on that aspect. So Corey.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. I just really briefly wanted to share on behalf of the council and working in cooperation with MAPSA that we're really here to help support you through this. I know with Michael and Melissa, there was a lot of information shared, and we're still trying to go through it. We've also reached out to Dr. McGossett to put some resources together that Becky will share at the end of the session. About what we know about permissible uses and also potential issues with some of that. So obviously we want to make sure first and foremost that technically we have those pieces right. But as we learn more too, we want to help think about what best practices could be for the funds and how we can best use those. So that will be coming in coordination with MAPSA and several other webinars. I also just, I know it sounds like repeating this, but your auditor is going to be a huge resource. We've gotten several questions already through our office about, specific issues, can I do X, Y, and Z? Your auditor is really going to make that determination through the audit and determine if it's an allowable expense. And we can help in that, but that's really what it's going to boil down to. So the auditor is going to be extremely important. So I just wanted to say that again. And as we go through this, if you guys have questions, we're here to help. So that's it for me, Dan.
Appreciate that, Corey. Q&A. Michael, I know one of the comments, the chat questions was around timing. I read it as, when can we start? When can we go back to begin counting the expenditure of these dollars, and what's the end date on them? You may have covered that in your information, but just highlight those dates for us in each of those three revenue streams.
Sure, no problem, Dan. So yeah, each of the buckets have a different end date. And so that again is the September 30th of 21, 22, and 23. They all go back to the date that the emergency declaration was declared. And so that was March 15th or 13th of 2020. And so that's the beginning date of all the three major ESSER buckets.
Awesome, thank you. Alicia, I think I saw you kind of leaning in. Did you want to make any comments?
Didn't have any, if anybody has any questions.
I have a question for Melissa. For the schools that haven't gone through a single audit before, is there any concerns that their current auditor will be able to do that? Are all auditors able to do a single audit, or would they need to, ask that question?
They should be, but I would definitely ask that question and see if maybe that their auditor, depending on size, because I guess it depends on some of the schools that are probably in more rural districts that have smaller audit firms. They may have to contract out with another professional to provide that service. Typically, the audit and a single audit are done concurrently. So it's definitely, or they could, do the audit and get all the numbers finalized and move to the single audit. So they definitely could contract out, but it's probably a good question to ask their auditors.
And then Melissa, a rough estimate, if you were going to look at a cost for the single audit, is it typically the same amount as your regular audit, 50%? What do they expect for, fees for that additional audit?
It totally depends. So our base audit fee for single audits is going to be about $5,000 for one program, and then adding on additional from there. But again, it also depends on the size and scope of the school, the program, and what we're getting into. Our price is a bit discounted just because we add them onto our regular audits. So it's just going to depend on the audit firm.
So let me ask a question of any of the experts here. I'm just going to state it. So we heard the terms from several of you. The feds have been very broad. They are talking about some major categories, and there's flexibility in that. And yet, by history and experience, we tend to see that, okay, that's what Congress and the federal government said. Now the state government kind of narrows that down because they want to be safe about how they comply, and it gets narrower and narrower. So as people are putting their plans together, as we do see some guidance, do you have suggestions, any of you, on how schools, should they even go to the point of saying, you know what, this is allowable, I want to push back a little bit and make sure I get approval for some plan that I have? Because I think the federal flexibility actually allows it, but I'm hearing from my field rep or somebody else that maybe I can't do that. How much of that yin and yang should schools engage in as they're making plans, or do we just wait for the guidance and some permission? Where's that tension at, guys?
I don't think there's an answer there, Dan. I think a lot of it is individual schools, risk assessment. How much risk do they want to take, and how safe do they want to be, and where does that go? We've seen that the state can and does try to narrow it. We've even seen the legislature attempt to narrow that funding. And I think we'll see that a little bit more as we play out, that they're going to try to narrow what you can spend that funding on. And there's a question of whether that, is legal or not. But I think it's schools' risk analysis and what they want to push back on and what they want to try.
As part of that, I'm guessing, just trying to pull out some things that might be helpful to people as we're all in this unknown space. As guidance comes out, I'm going to take Melissa's advice. Start talking to your auditor, start talking to your authorizers, start talking to anybody else at your board, get some confidence. Isn't this what this means? And then, yeah, you'd have to start to do that risk analysis. Is that a good plan? Communicate early, get people involved that are going to be overseeing this with you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
There was a question in the Q&A. Anybody want to take a stab at that? When the remaining ESSER 2 formula funds are appropriated, will those funds be added to the same budget for ESSER 2 that is out in MEGS, or will it come in as a separate budget?
My best guess at that would be we got to wait for MDE. I know that they knew that the spending plan you put forward already did not have the extra chunk. I don't know how they're going to solve that problem with, another 840 million parsed out. There was another question that I saw to clarify the end dates that I listed do not include tidings. So like for your ESSER 1 funds, where the end date that I listed, because that's how it starts, is September 30th of this year, the tidings amendment will give you another calendar year. And so the final end date, like the ESSER 3 chunk, will be September 30th, 2024. I hope that's clear. There's a ton of dates. I apologize. I also had a question about FID submissions and audits. Last year they were pushed back. A lot of you will recall, to December 1st. Normally they are November 1st. All indications are that it will go back to November 1st. So despite these complexities, it looks like the extension was a 1 year thing.
And what about, I'd ask each of you, I guess, do your best prediction. When do you think guidance will be coming on some of this? Is this, hey, we're waiting any day? Is this week by week? Is this month by month? Are we waiting till summer? Anybody have predictions on when we are going to see some of these, some of the guidance coming out?
I'll let Michael take that one.
Yeah, I know none of you like
for how other people. Well, but one thing I will say is, yes, there's a lot of pots, and yes, this is complicated. But as we work through it, a lot of them work similar to the ones that came before. And so now that they've figured out how to get ESSER 1 into the systems that you guys as stakeholders interact with, I think that makes it easier once ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 get through the legislative process and it goes straight to MDE to say, okay, now allow them to access them.
I'm always giving Alicia heartaches because I always say her gut instinct is better than most people's facts. So that's why I'm leaning on you guys a little bit. Becky, do we have other questions that we're seeing in the chat? Or
yeah, I just noticed a few more here in the chat about, do we need to track the extra year differently? And what if we don't spend all of our ESSER 1 money by September 30th?
My best guess is, track, continue to rely on your grant award notifications, continue to rely on forthcoming MDE guidance. I wish I had something better.
Other comments or questions? Anybody? Corey, you had some good questions for folks. Anything else from the phone calls you've been getting? Anything else that you might just reiterate the answers you've been giving to folks?
Yeah, the only thing I would share again is I know everyone's probably a little frustrated that we don't have answers to all of this, and we're right there with you. And as we get this, we'll share it out. So, and I know there's a lot of specifics, but just hang in there. And we'll get it as soon as we can.
Yeah, again, absolutely, Corey. That was the theme today, right? Everybody's starting to ask questions. The reality is we don't know. Nobody knows. So this is a beginning. And we want to get those resources, the information when it's available. You'll hear about it. But if you don't know, go to the Mastermind Network. That's where we're going to keep that going. ask questions if you have them. Look for the information as it becomes available. And we're going to keep working on this as long as it takes to keep people informed. So we knew it wasn't going to be a, boy, here it is, everybody's questions will be answered process. Yeah, Sean, good question. I don't know, there is an elevator speech. Michael,
So
elevator speech?
my elevator speech would be call your auditor.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but they're going to be really the person that's saying yay or nay to your decisions and what you can and can't do, and whether they're going to, you know, how they're going to record it in the audit. So that would be my elevator speech, call your auditor.
Yep.
Good
And we
job.
might have all the answers right now either, but we will do our best to work through it with you, because you know, we want you guys to be able to spend this money and spend it appropriately so that we don't have findings on your audit either.
I saw one last question too. Sarah Brookshire asked, any advice on how to best plan? Do you think we will have time to be approved and purchased by September 2021?
My best advice is to take time and plan, and don't spend it all by September 2021. Since you do have time to spend it, I think you're not going to be able to assess all of your needs by then. You're not going to know what your students need by then. So my advice is to hold off. If you are looking at some capital expenses that need to be done by September 2021, like ventilation and air filtration, my guess is, Michael, I mean, I think they'll have at least ESSER 2, if not ESSER 3 funds available by then. But I mean, it could get caught up in a veto fight again too. So I can't guarantee.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is make a guess at that, but the supplemental that went through appropriations so far, and again, it's a process and we're not done with the process, but the supplemental that went through appropriations includes 4.8 billion, which is the remaining ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So those two buckets right now are working through the legislative process together. I'm not going to speak about how it shakes out at the very end, but right now they are together and they're moving through.
So is there a good summary in everything you guys just said of get started now thinking what's your current strategic plan, what's your current needs, but don't be in a rush, right? Start engaging your experts, start engaging your auditors, your authorizers, your boards, obviously, but you don't have to rush to get the money out the door tomorrow. You've got some time. And the elevator speech depends on how tall the building is. I mean, you know, but I like Corey's answer. Anything else? Becky, are we missing any other questions I'm not seeing here?
It looks like we're all caught up. I would just encourage you, if you're on today and you felt like there was a question you had that wasn't answered, to please post it inside the Mastermind Network. There was an ESSER topic created. So under the topics on the left-hand side, you can easily, anyone can post. You can post a question, not just to these experts, to everyone, right? There might be other people. We have almost 1,200 people in the network. So we all want to lean on each other and ask those questions and share those best practices and resources as they come. The other thing too, I would just note is if you haven't downloaded the mobile app for Mastermind Network, do so. That way you can actually change your notifications. Say you don't want to get notified of anything else except when things post an ESSER topic, you can set your notification so that you literally get a phone notification the minute Alicia posts something about ESSER inside the network. If you have questions about how to do that, please feel free to reach out. A couple of other real quick MAPSA things. Did want to mention MAPSA's Staples Advantage program. We just know that obviously a lot of people are looking at different purchasing options, considering these additional funds. Other than office supplies, I just want to make sure everyone knows that you can also find technology, furniture, and facility solutions all with MAPS or all with Staples. If you are using Staples for your purchasing, but you're not sure if you're ordering through MAPSA's program, reach out to Heather Reisner on MAPSA's team. You can email her or message her right within the Mastermind Network too, and she can check on that for you. Charter Schools Week is May 10th through the 14th. It's coming up here in a couple of weeks. Hopefully everyone should have received information about how to celebrate and follow along throughout the week. This year we've changed. We have a week-long list of activities. And we just want to encourage everyone to start the week off on Monday with organizing organizing school visits with your local legislators, whether that's in person or virtual. But we want to get as many legislators out in charter schools on Monday, May 10th. So let us know if you need any help with that as well. And lastly, we just want to thank you to 21st Century Ed for supporting this webinar. They were our sponsor. Consider checking out their summer STEM program. You can feel free to reach out to Marlon Lindsay. He's in Mastermind Network for any additional information. And with that, again, thank you everyone for attending. I'll make sure the recording gets posted today, any additional resources, and know that Melissa, Michael, they are inside the network too. So you can easily chat them inside the network or ask a question. That's what the network's for, right? To bring everyone together to just lean on each other and support each other.
Good job, Becky. When in the world did it become May? Right? It's right around the corner. Melissa, Michael, Corey, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned. I know it's a pitch. We've been saying it, but you need to know. Go to the Mastermind Network. Those posts are going to be there when we know details. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.